Hello and welcome back to CWU Live. Now, first of all, first things first, we know many of you will want an update on the pay terms and conditions negotiation. Now, we are committed to doing that in full by Monday at the latest. Those talks are still ongoing. In the meantime, tonight is all about the USO pilots. And we're so pleased to have with us to take your questions, Tony Booch. Tony, welcome back to the show. And we also have representatives from two of the offices who are currently in the pilot. So Neil Kidwell is overseeing Brinklo Delivery Office in Milton Keynes. Welcome to the show, Neil. And we've got Paul Gillen, who has been supporting our members in Air Delivery Office in Scotland. So thank you so much for joining us as well, Paul.
Thank you.
We will be taking your questions as we go. So please do put those in the comments. I know Tony especially always relishes the opportunity to field your questions, so do ask whatever is on your mind about the USO pilots. Again, there's not much we can say about the pay negotiations, so obviously feel free to ask that, but don't expect a detailed answer until Monday. Let's talk about those pilots, because Tony, I know you've given an update on the pilots overall. You put out a report today which people will have had a chance to look at. It's also in the comments if you missed it. So could you sort of set us off with what is the latest on these pilots? What were the kind of details that you did include in your report?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and good evening, everyone. So I think first and foremost, I think I should just outline the reason for the session tonight is about transparency from a CWU perspective. We are trying to share with you as much of as we possibly can. So if you go back to the beginning part of this week, on Monday, we issued a joint statement between Royal Mail and the CWU that made it crystal clear that USO reform was dependent on Section 5, which you just referenced, Michael, in the intro, on paying all of the EP agreement being resolved. Likewise, there will be no full agreement or full deployment of USO reform until such time as all of the pilot offices had been evaluated and all of the remedies needed had been completed as part of the PIR process. And likewise, the third point for us is that we would secure an agreement that included a deployment plan that was more realistic than what Royal Mail were planning to introduce. And the fourth point, we've pressed Royal Mail on the CWU is being as transparent as we possibly can on the pilot offices, but they've got to do better on that part of it. So for that we put that out on Monday. I think you referenced on Tuesday there was an LTD that went out about there will be an update on USO, which will be a written report, which I'll touch on in a minute. There would be the pay would be dealt with two updates: one to our branches and reps on Sunday at the special conference that's taking place in Blackpool. And then a full update to our members by Monday at the very latest. So you've just covered that off. On the report that was published today, so I think it would be, from my perspective, I think it's important to thank the members and reps in all of the pilot offices, because this is a huge level of change, and they are testing and evaluating a complex change in the way in which we deliver mail via the optimized delivery model. Likewise, and I'm going to be honest here, the report that we issued today was probably ready the end of last week, but we delayed it because of we were trying to conclude the pay in Section 5 talks. So some of the aspects of that report are spent. Likewise, some of the offices and the detail in it have improved. Some of them have gone backwards. And I think it's fair to say that there's offices in both of those camps. Likewise, because obviously the size of 37 pilot offices and getting a report out, the report is only valid and sort of pertinent at that moment in time. So, for example, this week we've had 14 regional operational directors and divisional rep calls with our area reps, with our local reps along some of those sessions, to do it as a national triage call to ascertain what really needed further clarification on the design and the concept, what's working well, what isn't working well, and the stuff that isn't working well, how do we apply the fixes that our reps have come up with in those PIRs, in those areas, all of the solutions to get that over the line. Now, a number of them have done that this week. A number of those officers are due to get that completed over the next 2 weeks. But obviously, the reason why we've invited Paul on from Air in Scotland and obviously Neil for Brinklo is because both of them have been part of those sessions this week. They've been heavily involved in the USO pilot activities for their areas. And it's important that we try to, again, position as part of our communications and everything that's going on. We're asking the guys to give you an update with full transparency, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, some of their frustrations, so that obviously our reps and members can listen to that firsthand tonight.
And from reading the report, I just had a couple of questions that I saw on social media. Other people sort of had similar questions. So it's more a clarification really than anything. So for each of the different delivery officers, you say what work pattern they've chosen, and some of it's a bit technical. So you've got 2/6, 2/5, 9-day fortnight, 4-day week. I understand 2/6 means 2 Saturdays off in every 6 or 2 Saturdays off in every 5. I think I've got that correct. But could you talk us through what are these work patterns that different delivery officers are able to choose from?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we obviously had a joint statement earlier on this year where we had 7 attendance patterns that were available or selected to the offices. So all 37 of offices have looked at those attendance patterns. They've looked at the times. They whittled it down to which are the 2 predominant ones that our members would want to vote on. And then at that point, they vote on the preferred option out of the 2. That's then been introduced in those offices. So we've got the 2 and 6 Saturdays off, the 2 and 5 Saturdays off, a 4-day week, a 9-day fortnight, a Wallington banked week. So we work 5 weeks on and get a week off. And then you've got the other 2, which are 13, you work 13 days over an 18-day period. So a 3-week rotation. And then you do 17 days over a 4-week rotation. So they're all in place. We have had 2 offices that have found an improvement to those attendance patterns. One has already been agreed, which is Stoke Newington. So they found a better, an improved 4-day week, and that's going live on Monday. And Nottingham North believe that they've got a better Wallington week system, which is currently going through the processes that we're trying to get agreed and introduced as soon as possible.
And let's look at some of the negatives as well. So as far as I understand, sort of more Saturdays off is one of the key positives from these pilots. But the trade-off for more Saturdays off is longer days. And as far as I understand, the longer days are causing quite a lot of concerns when it comes to fatigue. So could you talk about sort of fatigue worries that are having, or sort of the downsides we're seeing when it comes to fatigue from the new work patterns in these USO pilots?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we've done an ergonomic stroke fatigue study in 6 of the pilot offices so far. I think just before we started this call, I've just been sent the first cut of that for 4 of the offices. So Cumbernauld was one of those in Scotland, but I haven't yet fully had the chance to review it. I think where the change in attendance patterns, so because we're not doing a structural revision, because the increased call rate means a longer day, the attendance pattern enables people to do a longer day. They've got part-time going to full-time, or they should be, and increasing their hours. So that means people should be getting out on delivery earlier. Part of the fatigue study, though, and where we have got some people with concerns, and they're right concerns, and that's what will get addressed in a national agreement, is how can we take people off call walks on 5 days a week? So one of the CWU positions has been with Royal Mail in the national talk so far, is that we should cap the amount of days that someone does a call walk, so on a foot delivery, to 3 days. So that whereas now they're on 5 days, if we can do that over 3 days and they go into rotations, and I'm sure I know that in Paul's office that they've done those rotations, and he'll explain some of that. What that does do then is it means if we put somebody in a rotation, that means that helps with fatigue because they're not fully walking on a longer outdoor course span, and we're mixing that up. So it's work in progress, and we need to review the actual fatigue study. But it's paramount for us. Is one of the benefits that we've got to get in an overarching agreement has to be that none of our members will work more than 3 days on a core week.
And I know understaffing is also an issue in some delivery offices. I mean, obviously, fatigue and understaffing are 2 issues that are going to be very much connected. Would this be? I mean, clearly, this is going to be a real problem if you have all of these changes made to offices that are already understaffed. But could you talk about the issue of understaffing?
Yeah, so every office is meant to go through a recruitment process to start with, and obviously review their resourcing. So review their resourcing, and obviously whether they've got a surplus or whether they've got a shortfall. If they've got a shortfall, they should put the recruitment request in place to get that actioned. If they've got a surplus, then the surplus is in place to help get through, obviously the first 4 or 5 weeks of the change, because obviously you need those people. I think what would be fair from the pilot offices so far is that concerns are all of the surplus staff are being used to help the change and mitigate both the way of working on core and combined. I think a number of people will be concerned, though, is that if the surplus is switched off and they're taken out of those offices, so whether that's through voluntary redundancy, natural attrition, or whatever we agree as part of the overarching agreement, is that then those offices will start to struggle day in day out because they are utilising those surplus people to manage the operation now.
And let's talk about quality of service as well before I go on to Paul and Neil, which I will in one moment. So from my reading of the report, it looks like this is really mixed. So unless I've sort of misunderstood, Borwell in the Midlands have achieved 100% on targets for first and second class mail, whereas in Melton Mowbray it's only 83%, and it's actually gone down since they've been trialling the USO changes. So clearly lots of differences across delivery offices. Could you talk about that? Why does quality of service seem so mixed across these regions?
Yeah, so I think what has been clear is the vast majority have seen an improvement on quality of service against before the change. So now what we've said to Royal Mail, that isn't a badge of honour because we weren't delivering quality of service and the customer product beforehand. We've seen an improvement, but we've got to get that to the place where we want all of our offices to be 100% clear day in, day out. Our members have a fair and manageable workload and a bum on every seat. And that's what we've been clear that the USO model, the optimized delivery model, USO reform, has to do. This will not work if every office is under-resourced and we don't have bums on seats and every job's covered. They've accepted that. Now, you can see where there have been improvements, but where we have had challenges is when there's obviously, because everyone's already picked their annual leave, that's being honoured, and or where we get an increase or a spike in sick absence, that does create problems. And that is an area going forwards. On the day absence is something that both parties have got to try and resolve, because you cannot have a situation where any delivery office is not clear every day of the week.
Let's bring in Paul at this point. Can you tell us sort of the specific experiences you've had in air?
I say the most experience that we've had in air, I think we're week 9 now into our USO, and we did go into it with open eyes. We knew what we were getting into. We knew that the pilot office is where you find out what works, what doesn't work. Tony come up and explained that, Owen come up and explained that. Morale in air was good at the time. First 2 weeks, we had a bum in every seat. We had surplus staff. The office picked 2 and 5, which meant 2 long weekends within the 5 weeks. Shorter Saturdays. We got 16 staff made full time. And everybody went in and knew what was expected of us. But that's where the problems started. When we went in, we had the first bank holiday, and we've never seemed to recover for the first bank holiday at all. It's just been every day we're using the surplus staff and anybody that will work a day off to come in and take up the parts of duties that are failing every day. And that's in core and combined, not just core. So that has been the biggest struggle for us. The other struggle was we get told right at the beginning, if and when we identified any problems, the fixes would be as soon as they could put the fixes in. That's not been happening. There's just Royal Mail seems to be dragging their feet and putting the fixes in. 1 minute they say, yep, we understand, we're going to go ahead, we're going to get the fixes in. We go back, say to the members on the floor, good bit of news, we're going to get the fixes in. Then within 5 minutes, no, the fixes aren't coming in. Now, we've been told last week the fixes that we really need, because we knew what we needed to fix the units and we knew how we needed to fix the units. What we didn't have was somebody telling us, go ahead and put the fixes in. So Friday of last week, we've been told, go ahead, get the fixes in. It's not been agreed nationally, but locally and regionally, it's been agreed to just go ahead and put the fixes in.
And I suppose could you clarify what were those fixes that you were sort of desperate to put in?
I asked for a wee bit more. I asked for 3 duties and 3 DPRs. What we did get was 3 duties, 3 extra walks, and 1 DPR, and 2 of the duties put back out of scope instead of in scope. So that's going to help as well. We've got the vans, we've got the frames, and we're just going to go ahead and put the fixes in. And somebody asked me before I come on this, be brutally honest, and I will be brutally honest. Has it been challenging? Yeah, it has been challenging. I hear people talk about fatigue. Fatigue is an issue. Tiredness is an issue. But mental health, I think, is one of the bigger issues. Because if people don't see the fixes being put in, then every day they come into office, they see what's left, they see what's at the frame, their heads go down, spirits go down, and morale goes down. Now, we had 2 people from HR come in week 2 and went round the unit, and they says, morale's still quite high. They come in week 8, and their actual words to myself was they thought I'd changed every member of staff in the unit because morale was at an all-time low.
So I mean, that's a really as you know, that's if there are people watching this who aren't yet on the pilots, I mean, that's going to be very worrying, right? It felt okay after 2 weeks, then after 8 weeks, it felt terrible. I mean, the fact that the HR people have come in and said that, does that mean you think that Royal Mail are now taking this seriously? Do you sort of think a page might have been turned?
Discussions that I've had, Tony was on one of them last week. I mean, Royal Mail were saying all the right things after they got the report from the HR saying about morale, and they do keep on saying to us, we understand what we need to do. But again, it was that decision that nobody would give us to go and put the fixes in. Now, hopefully, touch wood, got all the staff on the floor on Friday and told them, got the go ahead to put the fixes in. And you could see a sigh of relief for the members. And I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't actually mention the work that the men and women in AirDO have put in and the other units through Britain, because it has been hard all the way through and it has been challenging, but they've stuck with it. And I can only put my hands up and say, well done.
And I suppose because the whole point of these pilots is to see whether these USO changes will work, if they can work, I suppose. And from your experience, would you classify what you've seen over the past few weeks as teething problems or something more fundamental than that?
No, I'd say we are still learning. Some it's starting to come together a little bit, but we need those changes in to push it forward and make it work better than what it actually is. Tony was talking about, yeah, we have deployed, nobody does core every day, so it's core combined. The only people that's doing the core every day is in non-drivers, which is a hard, and I'm still looking for something to sort that out. And you can put it down like a blue Peter part. If anybody has got an idea to sort it out, put it in a postcard, send it to me, and I'll give them a USO badge.
Tony, I'll go to Neil in one moment, of course, but do you want to come back and is there anything you want to add when it comes to the experience in air so far?
Oh, no. I mean, the reason we asked Paul to come on is because Paul was going to be brutally honest, and that's what we're trying to be. We're trying to be transparent. We're trying to share what's happening in the pilot offices. And as Paul just said, I think the biggest frustration has been through the USO reform has been when we've identified where there are problems with the design, the concept, where there needed to be tweaked, whether it's teething, whether it's the learning. It's taken so long for that to come to fruition. And that is, as Paul just said, where our members get frustrated with, because it then starts to be, whether it's their mental health, whether it's their well-being, coming into the office every day demoralised, morale drops, confidence drops. They think it's going to be same old Royal Mail. Now, hopefully, and Paul has said not on Friday, I think Paul's had confirmation this afternoon, this evening as well, that those agreed local fixes will go in. The one area that Paul did highlight that we have to deal with is the non-drivers, because I think Royal Mail will absolutely agree with the CWU and sign up to that all of our members should do no more than 3 days on a core delivery in a week, and they rotate between core and combined. Challenge is, how do we deal with that with non-drivers? Now, we've got some solutions on that, but we're using the pilot offices to test that going forward. So for me, the work that Paul and his reps in Scotland have done has been excellent, and the members in air and I just want to pay tribute to them and sticking at it. And obviously, we will support them going forward and ensuring that the solutions they've done are working in the office.
Yeah, and I should say, Paul, that you're getting a lot of very positive comments in the chat from that intervention. Let's go over to Neil Kidwell in Brinklo, obviously the other side of the UK. What can you tell us about how the pilots are going in your delivery office?
Well, first of all, let me just thank you for the opportunity to speak here, because I think it's absolutely paramount now that we start engaging and sharing our findings from these pilots, because that was always going to be the intention, to test them. Our guys in these offices are effectively flying blind, and to some degree they are guinea pigs because there's no real parameters. So we was left with the impression that there's quite a lot of negotiation, quite a bit of flexibility about how we deployed. The first problem in Brinklo, just to give you a bit of background, Brinklo did deploy a geo route revision no more than 4 or 5 weeks before they went live with the pilot, which with hindsight should have been a positive thing, because the geo route should have been successful. Unfortunately, it didn't really produce what we wanted from it, and it gave outdoor spans of an average of 4. It was actually 4 hours 42. So we went in there and didn't have time to bed that in. So with hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, we should have just held back a little bit before the pilot deployment. Some of the things that were overlooked, and we can all hold our hands up for this because it's a joint effort in that office, is we did not have a robust indoor plan going into it, and we've fallen over almost on day one because of that. People simply didn't know what they were doing on the indoor operation. They kind of understood to start with the combined and core routes. I don't think that was too much of a problem to get people's understanding on, but is what really was lacking was a lack of an indoor plan. That was compounded by the mail centre presentation, or the lack of segregation coming from there, because we're getting mail arriving in the office which is being called leakage, as in it shouldn't be arriving, but that's causing problem then, because we don't know if it's genuine deferred mail or it's just mail that is due for delivery that day. So that added to the workload of combined and core, and as Paul alluded to earlier, we're not having problems just on core or combined, it's on both because of those particular reasons. In Brinklo as well, anyone who's particularly familiar with it, it's actually based in Milton Keynes. The traffic forecast is a national decline. Obviously, we keep getting that drummed down our necks, but in reality, in Brinklo in particular, over the last 2 weeks, we've had a 10%, almost 10% increase in track 24 items, and we know they're Royal Mail's primary services, and that is having a massive impact on the ability to deliver, particularly the combined routes, because they just haven't enough time in the day to do the work. Fixes, we've put in some night duties. 4 night duties have gone in there to accelerate the IPS. There's also some additional IPS put in there, and we have utilised the surplus staff as best we can, but we can only stretch people so far. The fall off in overtime has not drastically pulled away, but it is just literally a different kind of overtime they're doing. They're working a longer day in the first instance, so people are not coming in particularly on their rest days where previously they might well volunteer to do it. I suppose it's a jigsaw of how do we put all these things back together. We need to start off with securing some more indoor hours to get people out at a reasonable time. But our determination is not to have people out on the street for more than 4 hours, particularly on the core deliveries, because that is not sustainable over a long period of time. So the only way we can possibly do that is maybe reintroduce some delivery walks into the office. I think there's a movement towards it from the business, but again, as Paul alluded to, there was a lot of talk about, oh, it's easy to fix, we'll make this work, come up with it, and we'll do it. We're only just seeing this week, possibly on the back of a meeting that Tony attended, ironically, a couple of days ago, that the business seems as if they're willing to embrace some permanent fixes, which will address the problems in there. In terms of staff morale, I like Paul again and Tony's alluded to the people in air, you've got to commend the people in that office, because they've put up with the geo route revision and then shortly followed, I say literally within weeks of this, going live with the pilot. That was never the intention. There should have been some period of change. They've been buying into it, and that's due massively down to the local CW reps in there, who have constantly been in dialogue with the members. The local management team as well have been on board, and I don't think any finger of criticism can be pointed at them whatsoever in terms of planning and doing it. Because they went in one of the relatively early walks, they didn't plan to rotate the core and combined guys. They produced 5 weeks worth of duty rotors, which clearly differentiated between somebody being on a combined and someone being on a core for that period. That's quickly been recognised as we need to change that, and they've addressed that now. So without any real guidance, we are going to rotate the core and combine, because fatigue is a big issue. There is a study going on for the ergonomic study in Brinklo as well. We're yet to see the results. I think it's only the second week in, and I'm going to find that particularly interesting. We had a mini heat wave down in this part of the country last week, and people were just struggling in normal offices, let alone out on some of the offices in some of the walks in Brinklo. So in some respect, we need to make sure that the lessons learned from mistakes, whether it's air, whether it's Brinklo, they have to be shared with other offices, because we can't have this placed on our members in the next wave of offices, because regardless of what we think, I don't think anybody's going to suggest that this USO trialing, turning into remodelling, is going to go away anytime soon. Royal Mail are determined to do it because of the potential savings they could generate from it, and we need to be better prepared. We've done everything we possibly could in preparation for Brinklo, but with a lack of information, like Tony's alluded to, the tools don't work. They've done their best, but it's basically on the back of a fad packet, which is not uncommon for Royal Mail, unfortunately.
I suppose that heat wave sort of brought to my mind the time of year that these pilots are, because I've seen some people in the comments say, well, even if it works now, it's not going to work at Christmas time, when there's obviously a lot more letters and presumably a lot more parcels as well. I suppose at the same time, people take more annual leave in the summer, and as you've just said there, you had some extreme weather last week. I mean, how should people understand that? Is there a chance that sort of you have all these fixes, it gets to a point where it works this month, but then you get to December and you realise, oh, actually, what worked in June isn't going to work in December? Is that a concern you've got?
Me personally, yeah, of course. One of the issues was from a lot of people in Brinklo was saying, well, we're struggling now with the volume of traffic levels, which again is probably unusually high. Nevertheless, at Christmas, they just can't see how it can possibly work at Christmas. So obviously it's some way off, but the weather conditions are going to be, without a shadow of a doubt, either wet at worst or cold, and they're going to propose a separate sort of challenge to what we're facing at the moment. Again, we tried to make some efforts last Saturday in particular to get our walking guys out on the road a little bit quicker. This remodeling doesn't allow for much flexing whatsoever, whether it's at the beginning of the duty, the end of the duty. There's not a lot of flexibility within it. It's fairly rigid in what you do, and I'm going to say I'm struggling at the moment to convince our members that we're going to have a short-term fix, let alone a long-term one.
I mean, we're at the time of year where mail's supposed to be dropping. I don't see that in the pilot unit. Same with the parcels. Parcels seem to have took a big spike right now, and that's an issue. A lot of areas Amazon don't deliver to, so we get all that work. And again, big issue. Come peak time, we struggle every peak time. I think it could be doubled this time coming round.
Neil and Paul, at this point I'm going to let you go, because I'm going to now just throw a load of questions at Tony from the live audience. But thank you so much, both of you, for your contributions, and I'll just pass on how many people in the chat sort of commenting on how sort of good and honest your contributions were. So thank you so much for that. Tony, before I go to you, I'm going to read out this joint statement made earlier this week So it's a joint statement from the union and Royal Mail. And then I'll ask you sort of how significant you think this is. So I think we can get this up on screen. So it says, subject to any decision from Ofcom, discussions are continuing on USO reform in line with the following principles. That any final agreement with the CWU on USO reform is also conditional on progress and implementation with the agreed timelines of the issues set out in Section 5 of the EP Group CWU agreement. Next, there will be no full deployment of USO reform until we have evaluated and remedied any issues from the ongoing pilot offices via the agreed PIR process. We will measure the success of the pilots against the need to deliver fair and achievable workloads and hit quality of service standards. Then they say once we have reached agreement for the full deployment of USO reform, we will agree a full deployment plan which respects the level of change happening in the business and any potential impact on our people and customers. And then it says, finally, to ensure maximum transparency, Royal Mail commits to sharing more information on the ongoing pilots with the wider workforce as we look to build trust and engagement. And then that's signed by Alistair Cochrane, who's the CEO of Royal Mail, and Martin Walsh, who all our viewers will know, is Deputy General Secretary Postal of the CWU. Tony, should members be reassured by that joint statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And that's the reason why we've brought Paul and Neil on today. And I just want to reinforce it. So there's a couple of things for us. So we have done this week, as I said earlier on at the start of the show, 14 sessions with rods and divisional rep areas, which it captured and covered all 35 of the offices that are live and the 2 that are not at this moment in time. Because we're absolutely clear that that second paragraph within the joint statement, that every single one of the pilot offices will be evaluated and remedied. That is absolutely crystal clear, and the business are committed to that will be done before any further deployment of USO is agreed. Secondly, again, a lot of our members think that the business are going to just steamroller through. So Ofcom are expected to make a decision on USO reform via the optimised delivery model in early July. But it's clear, regardless of what Ofcom do, the business have signed up in that joint statement that they commit to that any final agreement with the CWU is conditional on Section 5 being resolved. So Section 5 was the December 2024 agreement, which dealt with pay and all of the nuances around sick pay, VR, overtime rates, and new entrance terms and conditions. And I think you highlighted that at the start of the show, Michael. That will obviously be subject to updates by the latest by Monday the 30th to our members. But that joint statement is clear. That is what has to be resolved before we get any progress on USO, and all the PIR offices have to be resolved.
And I know sort of after this statement went out, there was some pushback on social media, people saying it's happening anyway, the union has no influence, people saying it's all being changed even though I'm not in a pilot office, or a manager has told us it's coming in September and nothing is stopping that. So if there is a sense that sort of, what does this joint statement mean? It feels like this is all being imposed anyway and we don't have a say. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so look, we originally 2 weeks ago issued a joint statement that said that pre-deployment planning would take place. So starter meetings, our reps will be involved in that to ascertain the base data, and likewise some of the frame changes would take place. The thing I would draw out though is, and this is I think the reason that Paul and Neil said, is what we have to do is we have to learn the lessons from the pilot offices. So a number of the pilot offices, the base data wasn't correct. The sort of the number of bums on seats wasn't there. There was vacancies. They've had to put the fixes in place. So we've listed, I think, over the last 3 days through the sessions with our reps and obviously the Royal Mail managers on. I think we're up to about 30 areas where we've absolutely got to give some clarification, both jointly, Royal Mail and CWU, on how the changes would be landed in office. And we've committed to that. They've committed to that evaluation. That is work in progress. And likewise, obviously, wherever we get to on the wider talks, the one area that we're going to have to do is, we think the business is being over optimistic on their deployment plan. So originally their plan was to deploy 100 offices per week before the end of October. That's everyone in. We think that is unrealistic. We've been at the pilot offices since the end of February. and we've only got 35 in, and the scale of this change, if Royal Mail get this wrong, it'll be a disaster for our members, for their employees, and for the public. And obviously for USO, this is about ensuring that quality of service is fixed, the company hits the targets, that morale is and the trust of our members is introduced, and all of our members get a fair and manageable workload, and we address fatigue. And I'm absolutely clear, we will get that right. We will not do any agreement until we've resolved all of those issues, and that joint statement makes that clear.
So we've got 1,400 people watching, so it's great to see this much engagement, and we've been collecting your questions throughout. So Tony, I'm basically just going to throw at you a lot of questions now, because there's lots of questions coming in. So Buchan Peter says, does the USO go back to 6 days a week during Christmas?
Yep, so we haven't necessarily, so in terms of the USO, so look, the first class letters will get delivered 6 days a week, and parcels will be delivered 6 days a week. It's only the non-priority mails and second class that gets deferred to Monday to Friday, and then it's done by the alternative day delivery. I think both Neo and Paul pulled out the fact that we have to have a solution for peak. We will see increased call rates and attendance calls, and the real challenge, I think, for our members is the traffic mix. So where there is more and more track now, for every time you stop at a doorstep, it's 2 or 3 minutes interaction at a doorstep. If you're getting over 200 or 300 of those tracked items a day, then on your call walk, then that is a significant problem in terms of your span time. Likewise, that is also going to be a challenge for the combined. So we've said to the business, as part of and we are evaluating this on the combined duties now. So some of the combined duties are covering two routes. It's been proven in the pilot offices that 2 routes is too big, and it would have to be reduced to 1.5 routes. And obviously that will flow into the peak, for whether that's from the beginning of November up to Christmas, or the time frame we agree. We've said that peak has to be a key consideration that we have to resolve.
Peter Knox says, what is plan B if the pilots don't work? Could they possibly go to 3-day delivery? Now, if my memory serves me correctly, that is what's happened in some European countries. I think Germany's gone to a 3-day delivery. What's your thoughts on what would the plan B be if these pilots don't work?
So look, I think the concept and the method does work. The issue is actually getting everything that sits up front correct in every office. So as I said earlier on, a bum on every seat, the right indoor plans. What is absolutely clear so far is that a number of the pilot offices don't have an indoor plan. People don't know what time they're due to get out on delivery. We have to get that right. Now, obviously, the reason why we're in the room for the CWU perspective nationally is, and it's been well versed, is that we think the optimized delivery model is one that we can introduce. It's the least impact on our members, has the least impact on jobs overall for our members, versus obviously, the worst case scenario, if the business or the Ofcom were to agree a reduced USO to 3 or 4 days, we don't think we can manage the headcount reduction via no compulsory redundancies. Whereas now we've got that agreement. So look, that's why we're involved in it. We think we can make it work. But obviously, you've heard the guys on the call earlier on. It does take there are challenges, but what it does need is it needs the business to act quicker when our members say X, Y, and Z can't be done, and when our reps are coming up in those workplaces and saying these are the fixes and solutions. They have to trust our members, trust our reps, and introduce those fixes as quick as possible, and not defer them and delay them as they have been.
Barry Crowhurst says, Southend here. So with having to throw money at this that isn't working on light period, how on earth can this work going forward when heavy and we all feel tired more than ever and cost? There's a few people sort of suggesting this, but it seems like the point of the USO trial is it's going to save the post office money, but to make these trials work, it seems like they need to keep getting more staff and overtime, and that it's costing more money. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think that it was well documented. Royal Mail said to Ofcom, and Ofcom published a report that they believe the optimised delivery model would save Royal Mail about £300 million per year. Now, obviously, that was from a base. Now, if that base is incorrect, and there's problems in every office which we know of, and we haven't been delivering quality of service because of previous revisions, then Royal Mail has to reintroduce and invest more delivery routes to get that right. And that is obviously some of the things that are happening now. For Southend, obviously, I know that Southend has got a lot of high capacity trolley duties, and obviously we've got to try and work that through. So that's almost where the point that was made earlier on by both Neil and Paul, where our non-drivers are doing those routes 5 days a week. How can we support that where they're not walking for 5 days? Because one of our aspirations and what we've said is no walking post person should be on a core walk for more than 3 days a week. So that's where some of that fatigue is being felt within Southend. And obviously, Southend's only been live now, I think, for about 2 weeks. So they're not quite at the PIR stage yet.
And Ned's 231s says this is going through regardless of the pilots because that's what we're getting told. I suppose presumably by managers. How would you respond to that?
No, I think the reality is, Ofcom are going to agree to change, and that's an honest appraisal. The union met Ofcom yesterday. I haven't fully been brought up to speed yet by Dave and Martin on the outputs of that, but we've raised our concerns with Ofcom on the speed of which that Royal Mail want to introduce this. But regardless of what decision Ofcom make, and whether that's in early July or whether that's the middle of July, the statement that was produced and signed by the business on Monday is absolutely clear that there will be no deployment of USO unless there's an agreement with the CWU. So even if Ofcom make that decision, any deployment plan, any introduction across the 1,200 offices that are outside the pilot offices, is dependent on us securing that full national agreement.
Andy Hunt says vertical prep is being rolled out in delivery offices as we speak. Should this be happening outside trial offices? Thanks. I mean, if you could just also explain what vertical prep means as well as answering that would be great, Tony.
So normally our members will have sort of mail from top to, left to right on their frames, so horizontally. The business obviously under a delivery blueprint wanted to change it to vertically, so you go up and down. There is some benefits for up and down because obviously we're getting more mail now on the core days. So if someone was consistently sorting at the height, then obviously from an ergonomic point of view, it's helping with fatigue. That has been agreed as part of the change. It's one of the things that once our members get used to, I think that they understand it. Do they love it? No, they don't, because no one likes change. I think that's an honest appraisal. It is being introduced in offices because we want people to get used to it, and most offices have been deploying 1 or 2 walks in their offices just so people can see it in advance of any deployment plan. So then you don't get big bang and there's all change going on at once, and then the offices struggle.
Nick Hartley says, what's the plan for Christmas with pilots? Typically mail only goes out every other day in December. Does this mean we will now be doing 4 or 5 days mail at a time?
No, it wouldn't be, because all first class and parcels would go out every day on the combined duties. The core walks would rotate Monday to Friday as they do. I think the real issue that we've got to pick up through peak is how do we deal with the increase in attendance calls and track volumes, which obviously brings pressures on the output. So I think the point's well made. I think we're alive to the fact that how do we deal with, it's not just an issue it's going to be live under USO reform. I think if we're honest, I think it's been an issue for our members for the last few years, in the sense of the traffic mix has been changing and the time out on delivery has been increasing. The business have been trying to cut that time, but obviously for every time you knock on a door with a parcel, there's a transaction time before you hand it over. And obviously, if you look at track volumes from 2024 to where we are in 2025, I think the guy said earlier on that the parcels in Brinklo have increased by 10%. So you can't obviously naturally introduce 10% greater for people's workload. So it's how we manage that. So we're alive to it and we'll deal with it.
Benny Boy says, will the rounds get smaller as we can barely complete our deliveries now, let alone at a 90% call rate? Thank you.
Yeah, so look, as part of the base data that took place, so in March and April, and again, we're about to publish this, or when I get a chance to do it tonight, it'll be right out to the divisional reps and they'll cascade this out to our area and local reps and obviously to the members. So in March and April, the business did a base data exercise, which should have been done with our reps. They've introduced circa 1,400 more routes than they had compared to the last November. And the number of obviously then have increased since. So every office as part of the process would go through a base data validation. Are the routes achievable now? If they're not, then obviously that's presented. And as you heard the guys earlier on the call, Some of them did it before the pilot, and I think if you use Paul in air earlier on, they've now agreed that 3 extra routes will be put back in as a result of the lessons learned. But the plan would be to get that base data signed off for every office before they go through the process.
Terry Devlin says kamikaze pilots. I think that's what the Japanese Air Force did sometimes in the Second World War, wasn't it? It says, is Royal Mail and certain managers going to take any notice to Section 5 and just plough on regardless? And he says, with the backing of certain reps in offices and locally. So I suppose there's a implied criticism in there as well as a question. I mean, how would you respond to that?
So we've agreed. We have agreed already. Actually, we've agreed a governance process. So we will have a tracker in place for every office, whether it's in line with what we've agreed. There will be then better strategic involvement meetings with the divisional reps and the rods every week. They will review the status of offices. The area reps and OPLs will be involved in that process weekly, and clearly we'll hold the business to account. We cannot have had any stronger words from the joint statement on Monday. And all levels of the union. So myself as a national officer, Martin as DGSP, Davey as for indoor, all of the divisional reps, all of our area reps, we will put that structure in place so we support all of our CWU reps in the workplaces, and we'll hold Royal Mail to what we agree, and we won't allow them to introduce stuff that's unagreed with the CWU.
Mike Vinicum says, with many pilot units reporting increased fatigue, operational strain and recruitment challenges, how will you ensure that the push for efficiency doesn't come at the expense of employee well-being?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things there, Michael. So one is obviously Dave and Martin met Ofcom yesterday, and that is about Ofcom's role as the regulator. Clearly, in terms of efficiency, you've got 2 dynamics, haven't you? You've got a letter volume down in some areas, which reduces Royal Mail's revenue. Yet we got parcels on the increase, we got tracked on the increase, and we've got customer experience. So whether it's pin on delivery, safe place, delivered to neighbour, they all take longer. So actually, you can have less letters, but your workload out on the street is increasing. So you've got 2 balances of forces going in the opposite direction. We keep getting compared against other postal administrators in Europe, but predominantly in the UK, the only people we're compared against is self-employed owner-driver models, and that is not a like-for-like model. So that has been raised yesterday through those discussions with Ofcom, and obviously, you know, we will ensure that every job is part of the success criteria, and one of the key components going forwards, that the trust and the morale for our members has to be dealt with. But likewise, the job design has to ensure fair and manageable workload, and that's why one of our key aspects going forwards is going to be that we ensure that all of our members, no one does more than 3 call days on delivery to ensure that manages fatigue.
Lots of questions from non-drivers or about non-drivers. I'll put David Green's to you. He says, are non-drivers included in this conversation or not?
Absolutely, yes. So look, non-drivers, obviously, we're going to protect the non-drivers. The bit we're just trying to work through is obviously, you know, we're trying to maximise Saturdays off. Saturday operation in the main requires people to drive Royal Mail vehicles and do the combined duties. But we have got a number of the pilot officers that are testing non-drivers using HCTs on a Saturday to cover 1.5 routes. So that is part of it. And likewise, obviously, there's a number of officers that are looking at their indoor tasks on a Saturday and doing some of the door-to-door prep. But the key thing for us is we want both drivers and non-drivers to have the same amount of Saturdays off, because we want those improved attendance patterns. So as part of the evaluation and the PIR pilot offices, that part of the non-drivers is being discussed, and there has been an audit of the 8,500 people that are deemed as non-drivers to ascertain why that is the case, and we're due to receive the first cut of that in the next 24, 48 hours.
As a follow-up actually on the drivers issue, so Britannia 182 says, our office has lots of non-drivers. Will they have to move offices to balance out the ratios of drivers and non-drivers?
No, that's not happened so far in the pilot activity. And so again, so where we've got to is a number of the non-drivers are potentially doing routes that are deemed out of scope. So some of them continue delivering as they do now, Monday to Friday. I think the issue for non-drivers is how do we ensure everyone has a fair, equitable Saturday attendance pattern, both at work and off work, and that everyone enjoys that benefit. So we've been clear with the business that we have to resolve, that Saturday issue, both indoor and can people do outdoor spans using other equipment rather than just vehicles.
Crypt20 says they already have people working solo on shared duties in Dunfermline, being told to take out the packets and first class. The frames haven't changed at all, so even that is unfinishable most days.
Yeah, it comes back to the way in which obviously units are operating now, isn't it? So I think if you come back to the point, I think for the last few years we've seen in delivery a number of cuts, carve up revisions that haven't worked. The whole premise is that for the pilot activities, one is the optimized delivery model and the USO reform has to work. But the second part of it is we have to ensure that where there's been previous revisions that have failed and are not working, that as part of the base data we do and we sign off, that has to ensure that those fixes are applied to those routes, both before we deploy, and then if there's anything that isn't captured, then as you've heard from the guys today, they pick that up, use the lessons learned, and then they put in place the fixes and the solutions to put it right.
Richard Perring says, why is it not an option to keep our current duty patterns?
So the reason for the existing duty patterns is because obviously if you're currently on a call rate of say 50% and your call rate is increasing to 80%, then obviously that's longer days, and that means more time. So the current attendance pattern, so if you're on a 1 in 6 attendance pattern now, on average your working day is 7 hours 24, and the move to a 2 and 5 Saturday off moves you to 7 hours 48, and that additional 24 minutes a day deals with the increase in your call rate. What happens alongside that is a number of part-timers are being made full-time, and I think that should be reinforced, that a number of the pilot offices have seen a massive increase in full-time employment and opportunity for our part-timers to increase their hours, and they do more indoor tasks, which mean people can get out on delivery earlier to do the outdoor. The bit that's struggling is a number of offices don't have that indoor plan correctly yet, and that's what the PIRs are picking up.
Just on sort of people going from part-time to full-time, I think this question relates to that. So Craig Comery says, hello gents, any news on part-time being made up? I know I felt quite upbeat when it was last mentioned, but after conversations in our office, I'm starting to think that we won't get that opportunity. How would you, or I suppose, can you give any advice to Craig as well as responding?
So I don't know whether Craig's in one of the pilot offices or not, but literally all of the pilot offices have seen that. In some instances, I think the biggest one is, I think it's from Stockton, where we've had over 15 people that have been made from part-time to full-time and seen the increase. But every office is doing that review of their resourcing model now, and asking every part-timer, do you want to increase your hours? Do you want to go full-time? Obviously, people have a choice to do that. They can't be compelled to do that. And then where we have got a shortfall, the recruitment requests are going in, because the one key thing that is as been accepted by the business is that every office will have to have every job covered, because you cannot afford to roll work from day one to day two. And obviously that gets us back to clearing every office day in, day out. So if the colleague wasn't in one of the pilot offices, then when we get to that point, it will absolutely be one of the things we'll deal with.
That makes sense. So it might. So yeah, if you'd be surprised if Craig Comery was in one of the places with a USO pilot, because in those places part-time people are being made up to full-time. I suppose, Craig, if you are in somewhere with a USO pilot, let us know. Otherwise, potentially when you go into a pilot or when the USO comes into effect, that's when those changes could be made. John Herbert, I would love to know how we are going to train new entrants on this USO reform model. Current new entrant is on the same duty for 6 weeks. How will this work now roles change daily between walking and driving?
Yeah, it's an excellent question from John, and it's actually pertinent because we were discussing this today with the business. So John's right. When a new entrant comes into delivery office, normally they're kept on the same walk for 6 weeks, and obviously it's a learning exercise. Under this model, under USO reform, you could be on a van share, so you do walk 1 and 2 on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and then if you're still doing a walk-in delivery, then Tuesday and Thursday you would do walk 3 and 4. We've said to the business we should keep that new entrant on walk 1 and 2, but on the Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and actually use the workplace coaches to support them on the Tuesday and the Thursday when they do combined duties, so they're never off the same route. So we're alive to it, and it's ongoing activity. But the point made by John is absolutely you're well made, and we will get that produced over the next couple of weeks.
And Thomas says, what is the point in using surplus or overtime or getting managers in to clear in a trial, as it already shows it isn't achievable and is only serving to fudge the trial results, not giving a true reflection? And I suppose the argument there, if they say, well, after the USO, after the reforms, everything got much better, but actually it got better because they increased overtime and stuff, then is that fudging the results? I mean, how would you respond to that?
Well, throughout the pilots, we're capturing what work surplus staff are doing. All of the overtime's being captured. Likewise, any work manager should be being captured. I think the key thing though is like this is where we're protecting all of our members, because if you're in an office and you've got 40 duties now and you've only got 35 as part of the change under the pilot activity, we've made it clear that the 5 people that are surplus, their jobs are protected. They stay in their office. They can't be moved out. And they're there. Now, when we get to a point where the office is stabilised, there will be the opportunity in some offices for a VR exercise, so voluntary redundancy, and obviously we'll manage the surplus there. Likewise, if you take that example of 40 jobs previously and we got 5 surplus, it may well be through the pilot activity, exactly the point that Paul made earlier on, that in air, 3 extra duties are being put back in. Those 3 extra duties will be given to the surplus. So if the business gave them VR now as an option to resolve the surplus, then immediately they have to recruit 3 people, because after the bedding in period, you're almost putting duties back in.
I'm going to put 2 questions together because I think they're along similar lines. We're running out of time. So James Adams says, we're struggling to get 2 duties and 2 postmen in a van, and now they want 3 to 4 duties in a van. And then Backbar Besco says, or Bexo, I have 100 parcels on my town duty plus mail of about 9 bags full. How am I going to van share? And over Christmas I have 2 full Yorks full every single day, van full to the very top. So is it the case that people are being encouraged to share more vans, and there's a concern that not everyone and everything is going to fit in these vans?
Yeah, so I think the point that was being made is that currently, before USO reform, people are poking at their vehicles because of obviously the pairings that they've got on their van share. So if they're on walk 1 and 2, they're getting too much mail and they're getting too many parcels and it doesn't fit in. So you would need a solution for that now. Again, as when we go through the base data for every office, that would absolutely be reviewed, both whether the vehicle needs to change in size, or actually, if it was walk 1 and 2 that were paired together, do you need to change the pairing to accommodate a different? So you put 1 and 3 together, for example, and 2 goes with walk 4. And what that might do is it might balance out the workload better. So again, that will be part of the verification base data, which our members would feed back into their CWU reps, and the reps will be involved in that process.
And finally, Bobby Hoskins, are Ofcom being updated on these trials at the pilot sites in order for them to decide if these changes to USO should go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. So as I said through some of the other questions, Dave and Martin both met Ofcom yesterday. Ofcom also have visited a number of the pilot offices that they've been in Scotland. I think Owen Beaumont, who's one of our PEC members, met Ofcom himself when he visited the office and articulated some of the concerns that our members were experiencing and talking it through. So yes, absolutely, we'll continue to do that. And I think likewise, the union is also saying to the Labour Party that there should be a select committee on the USO going forward as well. So it's work in progress, and obviously we'll continue to update them. And potentially, I think if I go back to the report that we produced today, Michael, it may be well in the next edition that we cover off a specific part of that on where we think we are with Ofcom and our ongoing consultation with them.
Yeah, no, that would be very interesting to do that. Let's wrap up there. We've been going an hour. Tony, thank you so much for coming on and for answering all the questions. Well, not all the questions. There's been questions we haven't had time to answer, but answering so many of the questions which have been put to you by the audience and by members.
I appreciate the session. I do want to thank Neo and Paul for coming on and being open and honest with everyone. Look, I understand there is a lot of nervousness from our members out there on the USO, on the fact that the business, are making statements out there that it's coming in regardless. that I would signpost people to the joint statement that was issued on Monday. That cannot have been any clearer, and a good commitment from me, from all of the CWU reps and the CWU nationally, is that there will be no full deployment of the USO unless we get pay Section 5 agreed, and we've also evaluated and remedied all of the PIR aspects and related to the pilot officers, and we will get this right for our members.
Thank you so much, Tony, and thank you so much for watching and for all of your engagement. It's really good to see when so many people are watching and asking questions. We really do appreciate that. As ever, thank you so much for tuning into CWU Live. We'll see you again next week. And yeah, you'll get an update before then on the pay negotiations. So until then, stick with your union.